So I'm starting to feel a bit better, as I say, generally with these proportions. And I can start, I think this will be a good time for us to just map in a few more of the little direction changes that we've got going on in the front of the head. Because as I say, in profiles it's tricky to make good judgments about the rest of the drawing without those marked in. So I'm going to be using this point here as where the forehead is, and then we've got our bottom of our chin kind of dropping down, just down there. It's always a good idea to try to just divide things into the first kind of biggest divisions. So we don't want to jump in and try to find the mouth until we have a more definite idea of where the brow and where the nose is going to go. And generally you get this sort of rule of thirds, so it's sort of 1/3 up to the nose, 1/3 up to the brow, and then usually about 1/3 up to the forehead, although in this instance the forehead's a little bit lower than 1/3, I would say. So we'll start with the nose. The nose sits below halfway between those 2 points. So if this is halfway, I can see looking at the reference that point of the nose sits a solid amount below halfway. So something probably like about there, I would say, is the placement of the nose. Might be up or down slightly from that, but that's approximately what we're looking for. So then we can find from that point in the nose what's halfway, and the eyes are about halfway. So they may be sort of, the eyes sit about here, and then we've got a little bit of space above that for the brow. So we're starting to get an idea of where the eyes, where the brow, where the nose is going to go. And then again we want to find where the mouth is, and the mouth sits closer to the mouth than it does to the chin. And it's probably about probably about there. It's not too bad. So we've got our heights, so now we need to kind of start angling back in and out. And as I say, if we imagine a vertical line going up, this point of the chin, I'd say, sits a little bit further back from this point of the forehead. That wants to sit just a little bit further forward, I think. So from there we can angle out to where we thought our brow was. We can maybe just capture that little direction change up into the forehead. Then that's our eye kind of cutting back in. For now we're going to keep it fairly simple. Then we want our nose projecting forward. And then that tip. We'll be working a little bit more around all this shaping as we go. Then that top lip projects out. Angles back in to that center of the mouth. So we're starting to get this profile in place, and it's going to take some tweaking. Profiles are always fairly tricky little things, so don't worry if it doesn't feel quite right just yet. I'm going to spend quite a bit of time refining it. So I can go back to the rest of the head now. I'm gonna just add a little bit more complexity to the shapes. And reasonably happy now with that general sort of contour, outside contour. But it's going to be tricky for us to be entirely certain of these proportions until we start to get the shadows in as well. So the shadows are going to include the hair. The hair's very dark. So what we're really looking for is where the light isn't reaching the front planes of the face. So they turn away from the light source. So this part of the face captures a lot of light. This part of this point here, we can see very definitively the edge of the shadow. So that's the form of the head turning away from the light source into shadow. So we're going to block in just sort of a two-tone version of where we find shadows and where we find lights. Some lights go very dark. So here, for instance, is quite a dark tone, but it is still slightly in light. It's just raking, but it's not quite in shadow. The shadow edge is going to be something like sort of run through here, I think. It's fairly ambiguous through this section, so you can place it where you feel it works best. It's more definitive kind of up here, as I say, or like the shadows in the ears are much more evident. And as I say, we're going to be grouping the darker portions of the beard and the hair with those shadow shapes. I'd say the best place to start is try to find something midway. So we've got the overall width of the head, and I can see that this point here, this hair that drops down, is about halfway. So we'll start there. Otherwise you're kind of reaching from either different side. You're either reaching from the left hand side to try to the right hand side to try to get into the fronts of the features, or you're kind of reaching quite far from the left hand side to get it in. And I also know that that point of the brow sits just a little bit lower than where the hair angles back, so I can say the hair's going to angle back a bit higher than that then, so that's going to angle back there. And I think that's going to make me have to reassess the top of my hair a bit, but I'll get these shadow shapes in and then we'll go back and start to kind of fiddle around a bit with that hair. Until you've got the masses in, it's always sort of guesswork. It's harder to be sort of certain of shapes until they become more mass-like. So we've got that hair there. About here's probably where the sideburn begins. And then from having that in place, I can now sort of divide between that point there. I can see that it's sitting left of center between those two extremes. And then I can also see this corner of the eye I can maybe now find, and that's going to sit just to the left of that point. So I'm using all my previous measurements as a basis for the sort of carrying on. So there's always something that I'm kind of referring back to help me. I'm using this little angle back just to start sort of thinking about this shadow and this little shadow in here. I don't want it to go too complex though, so I'm going to keep it simpler for the eye. Just have a little angle back. The eye I'm going to flesh out later. And we've got this cheek and shadow, and then that angles back up to connect with where our shadow shape on the front of the nose. So you can see the shadows starting to get plotted out. I'll zoom in a little bit so you can get a slightly better look at it as I'm drawing it in. Tip of the nose has a little bit more of a shadow. And the bottom of the nose is mostly in shadow as well, though there is that little tiny touch of light, but we'll ignore that for the time being. Then below that, I've got the start of the moustache. That's some of that is actually sort of almost in light, but because it's dark, we're going to group it in with the darks. Then from there, the bulk of the mouth sort of projecting out. Then I can drop down to the shadows on the neck. And I've got this, within that shadow in the neck, we've just got another little kind of angle back out. As I say, we're not going to flesh out the shirt too much for this one because we want to focus in a bit more on the face itself. So go back up here now, and we've got all of that front shape blocked in, but everything does connect in this. So we've now got the kind of move our way around, start working on the ear. So the ear, again, using horizontal alignments, the top of it sits just slightly below that eye. And again, using sort of alignments vertically, I'm trying to make sure they've got the right sort of angles back up from the where this beard is sort of curving back up towards eyebrow. And again, horizontal alignment, whether relative to this point here of the beard, where does the back of the head project out from? And it's maybe should be a little bit higher up than what we've got, so sort of more there. And then we can start to find the shape of the ear just by working the shadow of the hair around the ear shape. Can also plot in some of the major shapes in the ear. So we do the ear shapes the same way that we've been doing all the others. Just kind of breaking them down to simpler forms. And just plotting just the darkest shapes, those bits of the ear that are in shadow. And that's pretty much all of the shadows blocked in. So the next step, once we get to this stage, is just to fill them in. We want to make them into a masked in tone. And I do that just by, just generally over all of them, they can merge together at this stage. Just shading within those lines that we made. You can go over that one more time if you need to, just to make it more distinctive. It feels too faint. It's always better to start slightly more faint, working lightly before going heavier with stuff. But you can see that roughly is not too bad as a sort of starting point for our shadow shapes. So I'm going to give you a little bit of time to kind of catch up, make sure you're at that point before I progress. So I'll give you till about 20 past or so. Another kind of 5 minutes, 5 to maybe a little bit before 20 past, but just a bit of time to work on it.